Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Shell by Shell episode, a series where we tackle all of the Hack the Box starting point machines, teaching the fundamentals of ethical hacking and penetration testing. This week, we have the very last box of Tier 1, which is 3. And if you're following along, make sure you start your machine and you connect to the VPN. I have already done so with the sudo openvpn command as a reminder from last week that if you see the initialization sequence completed right here, that means you're good to go. I've already started my machine as I've said, and we have a little hint here that we'll get to later on. But make sure that you wait a few minutes before you start running scans or anything against this machine because there's a few services that need to boot up in order for it to work. So we'll come back to this s3.toppers.http later, but for now, let's get straight into the box. So I'll go to my desktop 1, I'll open a new terminal, make it a little bigger to see, and I'll make directory, hack the box, not seasonal, starting point, tier 1 and 3. I will copy that, cd into that directory, and I'll run an nmap scan against the IP, which I forgot to copy. Go back here, copy, run the IP, and output it into an nmap.txt format. Once again, this nmap command should be very familiar at this point, but -t4 is a timing thing, so we want it to go relatively quickly. -a is for all of the service scans, so we're running -sc, -sv, and -o in -a, our IP that we're attacking, and then we're outputting it into an nmap.txt format where we can refer to it later. Looks like we only have 2 ports open. We have SSH on port 22 and HTTP on port 80 titled the toppers. So looks pretty simple. I'll open a Firefox window here, and I will also run a GoBuster on this IP with a word list of user share word lists. I like to use derb common.txt, but really this is your preference. And then we can head over to this IP and see what is cooking. I'll make this a little bigger. Maybe that's a little too big. But looks like it is a band. So the band called the Toppers, group of 5 guys. Okay. Really no functionality here that I'm seeing. They have some tour dates. Maybe we can do something here with buying the tickets. Okay. Maybe there's some functionality here. Let's see. Test. What is this? How many? Say 100 tickets to test at test.com. Let's see what happens here. And the pay button doesn't do anything. So we're not sending any requests to or from the server. We can close that. And then lastly, we have a contact form. Test, test, test. Send, and it doesn't do anything. So this is just a blank contact form. Though there is something that we should notice here. And this will happen pretty frequently with Hack the Box and Try Hack Me, is you'll get little hints right here. So you'll get the domain of the box that you're attacking. So here we have mail at the toppers.htb. Currently, we're just running and we're resolving from an IP address, but we're not resolving anything. It's just we go to this IP address on the web and it resolves to this web page. However, this domain here, we can map the IP we're currently visiting to the domain just to make our lives easier and to make things a little more formal, I suppose. And this will allow us to do subdomain enumeration and just better enumeration overall. So to do that, we're going to look at our etc hosts file. So sudo nano etc hosts. And we touched on this file a little earlier in the series, but essentially we're just mapping IP addresses to domains. And you see here with some of the Season 8 boxes that Hack the Box just released, we have an IP address and then the domain that it maps to. Same thing here. Let's see what our IP is. I'll copy that. Oops. Not the entire URL, just the IP. So 10.129.221.129, and that maps to the toppers.htb. I'll save that. And then if we open a new tab and go to the toppers.htb, we'll see that the same page resolves. So that's just a quick review of the etc host file. And the next thing that we can do is subdomain enumeration. And I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. When I tried this before the video started and just doing a little test run, it did not work. So I'm going to try again, and perhaps the gods, the content gods watching over us will allow this to work, but this will not work, and I am still working on a solution as to why it's not working. But the syntax here that I like to use is from ff. You can use GoBuster as well, but I think ff is a little cleaner output-wise. So ff-u, and then a URL here, we can provide our word list. There's one in the same, so in that same directory that we were just in, so user share word list derb, they have, this is where we found common.txt. We'll also find subdomains top 1,000,000, 20,000. So this is just 20,000 subdomains that we can quickly enumerate from. And then we're going to add the -h for headers, and we're going to add a host header, and our host is going to be fuzz, that's the toppers.htb. And this is what this is going to do is this is the magic of subdomain enumeration. So we're essentially going to take all of the words in this word list and we're going to throw them into wherever the fuzz is. So we're going to look for, and I'll show you, press enter here. And it should start spitting out a bunch of stuff here. I'll Control C to stop that. But what's happening here is all of these words from the word list are just being thrown, they're being prepended to the domain here. So we're trying static.thetoppers.htb. We're trying DNS1, lists, etc., etc., etc. And if it finds something that's a different size or a different status, it'll spit it at us. But we have to do that filtering manually. So I like to do the -ac, which I think stands for autocorrection. I'm not exactly sure. You can either do -ac or you can do -fs and filter by size. And we'd filter by 11,952, and it should find something. This is new. This did not happen before, but it doesn't look like there's anything that actually came of this. So I'll do the same thing, but instead of AC, I'll filter by size and filter by 11,952. We'll see if we get a different result. Looks like the same weird things happening. Couldn't tell you why this is happening. It's very strange and not expected. But in a normal scenario where we're enumerating subdomains, we shouldn't see this, but we should instead see any valid subdomains that pop up. Since none pop up here, I'm going to go back to our fourth desktop here, and we see in a little note here, expect to see status running when visiting s3.thetoppers.htb. So s3 was the subdomain that we were looking for, but for some reason ff could not find it. And we can confirm that s3 is actually in our word list. So if I go to the word list here, I will cat the word list and I'll grep s3. I'll do and then we see all of the matches with s3, and we see s3 is right here. So if the tools worked, we would have seen s3 pop up, but for some reason today, any of the subdomain enumeration tools are not working. I encourage you to give it a go. Maybe by the time you're watching this, your subdomain enumeration tools will work, but for me, they did not work. But let's say hypothetically, ff found s3 as it was intended to. What can we do from there? Well, if we visit s3.thetoppers.htb, we're going to get this page because our browser can't resolve it properly. This again is the DNS issue we ran into earlier. So we're going to go edit our etc host files again. And what I like to do is just space from what the current entry is, s3.thetoppers.htb. So it's the same thing, but you're just adding that subdomain. I'll save that and exit. If we refresh this page, we see status running. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this S3 means, S3 is just an Amazon bucket. So if you search Amazon S3 bucket, you can get a quick overview of what this is, but it's pretty much just cloud storage. So you can host things in an S3 bucket, which is probably what we're seeing here. So probably the toppers.htb is being hosted inside of a AWS S3 bucket. And to interact with this, we can use the AWS tool. So if we do AWS help, there is a ton of stuff here. So I'm going to go over just the bare bones, what I've learned, and I don't even know a lot of this stuff. This is sort of new to the both of us, so this is going to be a learning experience for everyone here. But to enumerate S3 buckets, you kind of see it autofills there, but you're going to do AWS S3 ls. So it's very similar. We're going to use the ls command, but unfortunately we see we can't connect to the endpoint https s3.temp.amazonaws.com. We also, it's good to note that you need to do Amazon configure or AWS configure, and it'll give you an access key here, and it's because I've done this before, so you shouldn't see, there should be none here. I'll do testing, 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 testing. But it doesn't really matter what you put here as long as you put something, AWS configure, and then if we run that same thing, we should see that our domain here changes. But it doesn't really matter in the end because this isn't where we're trying to go. Okay, we're trying to specify the endpoint here, s3.toppers.htb. And to do that, we do --endpoint equals that URL, and we'll see if we get anything in response. And we do. So if I don't do S3 ls, well, it's not going to do anything. But listing out any of the S3 buckets, we see that there is one, and it's called the toppers.htb. Now, let's say we want to enumerate the toppers.htb a little further. We can do S3 : // so you can kind of think of this as any protocol that we'd normally see. So you can do this with SSH, you can do this with obviously HTTP or HTTPS. This is how you're going to interact with the protocol and then the domain. So to interact with the bucket, we're going to do S3 : / and then the URL. And it looks very similar to any file share or listing that we'd see originally. So quick ls here, it's very similar thing. LSLA, we get the date and fun stuff like that. So running this command, we're seeing a very similar syntax and very similar output. And as you can see, I've done this before. So if I wonder if I can remove that shell.php. Maybe not, but we'll ignore that for now. And we'll see, just to focus on these top 3 files. So we have an images directory, we have the .htaccess, which is default for web pages, and we have index.php. And this is telling me not only that there's only index.php on this website, but it's PHP ran. And what we can do with an S3 bucket is we can actually upload files to an S3 bucket since we're already authenticated. If we weren't able to authenticate here, then it would have told us. We wouldn't have been able to use the ls command. It would have said, hey, you need authentication, you need credentials. But since we can use ls and we can see stuff, it's very likely that we can upload files to this bucket as well. And then remember that if we go to the toppers.htb, this is the bucket this is where the bucket is where the website's being hosted. So if we upload files to the bucket here in this directory, we should be able to navigate to those files from where we are in our directory. So let's make a test.txt file and say, hello, this is a test. Save it, exit, we'll cat it out, and we'll see that this is a test. So we're going to use that same syntax as before, but instead of ls, we're going to do cp, which is copy. So same thing as Linux. So we're going to copy, and then we're going to provide our file, test.txt, to the S3 bucket. And it said upload, so this means it's successful. If we do an ls again, we should see we have our test.txt. Now if we go back to our website and run test.txt, we see that our file has been successfully uploaded to the web server and we can retrieve files. Now what's the big deal, you may be asking? Why is this important? Well, we can get something called a reverse shell, which I don't think we've gone over yet in this series. So this is super exciting, really cool stuff. A reverse shell is what's going to make you feel like the hackers in the movies. You're going to be like, oh, I'm in. That's what I'm going to say after I get a reverse shell. So what I like to do, I like to go to revshells.com, and we know that we're dealing with PHP, both from what we've seen, and I wonder if Wappalizer shows PHP. We'll check Wappalizer really quick. And yes, it says PHP is the programming language of choice. So we know that this website is running PHP, and we know that we can interact with the backend web server and retrieve files. Retrieve files, upload files, and once we can upload a shell to the web server, it's pretty much game over. So watch this. I'm going to go to revshells.com. I'm going to enter my IP address, which is already in there. I'll enter the port that I'll listen on. You can kind of do any port as long as it's not a common one. I like to do 4444. And then I'll search PHP, and I'll do this first one, PHP pen test monkey. And all of your information should already be filled in here as long as you do the stuff up here. I'll scroll down and click copy. I'm going to make a file called shell. I'll do rev.php. I'll paste that, Control S to save, Control X to exit. And we're going to do that exact same syntax. So instead of copying a test file, we're going to copy rev.php. I click enter, and upload successful. We can verify with the ls command. Not provide a file. And we see we have our rev.php. Now, we're going to run the listener command. So it kind of gives you the step-by-step here in revshells.com. So you want your listener to be netcat. So you can do netcat lvnp on the port that you chose. So this is in case 4444. And then all we need to do now is just navigate to our file that we uploaded, rev.php, and watch the magic. Bang. So we see that we got our response here, and we are now, if I do an ifconfig, we are now on the target machine. So again, this is not my IP, this is the machine's IP. So we are now interacting with the machine's Unix file system. Click ls, we're at the root of the file system, so go to var www ls, and that is the flag. And we do a cd html, and this is where all of our files are uploaded. So cat index.php, we should be able to see this is the exact website that we're looking at here. So this is all the HTML and good stuff that is providing this website. And yep, we can cat out our flag, and that is game over. So that is a very, very quick introduction to reverse shells. There's a lot more to come with that, and there's a lot of things such as file upload vulnerabilities, any remote code execution you get a reverse shell, but reverse shells are sort of the cream of the crop of ethical hacking and penetration testing. It's sort of the very feel good type of feeling where if you get a reverse shell, it just feels nice, and it's not always realistic in the sense of, hey, every time you need to hack something, you need to get a reverse shell. That's not true at all, but it feels very good. It feels very hackery. And yeah, that's a super quick introduction to them. Make sure you use revshells.com, and Google as well as your best friend. But that is the box. We've solved it properly. Hope you learned something with revshells, and let's jump over to the questions where we can start answering and then wrap up our machine here. Test 1, how many TCP ports are open? There were only 2 ports open, which were SSH and HTTP. We didn't necessarily use the SSH port, but it was nice to know that it was open. What is the domain of the email address provided in the contact section of the website? Remember, this is the mail address we're looking at. So it was mail@thetoppers.htb. And then from here, we added it to our etc host file, which is what this next question is talking about. So in the absence of a DNS server, which will do this stuff automatically, which Linux file can we use to resolve host names to IP addresses in order to be able to access the website that point to these host names? And that's just a lengthy explanation of saying if we put the IP address and the host name in there, it'll resolve properly and we'll be able to reach it with our browser. And that is etc hosts. What subdomain is discovered during further enumeration? We tried doing this, and I'm still puzzled as to why it's not working, but sometimes tools will break, and I'll have to find a fix for that later, but it is s3.toppers.htb. What service is running on the discovered subdomain? This is Amazon S3, so the S3 buckets. What command line utility can be used to interact with the service running on the discovered subdomain? This is aws-cli, aws-cli, just a complete mouthful there. We didn't use this directly. That is the tool. So when you saw me going over here, I'll Control-C out of this. Doing AWS, This is AWS CLI, so if you sudo apt install AWS CLI, you should be able to use this AWS command and it'll light up blue for you, all nice. But AWS CLI is the whole command line interface for interacting with Amazon products. So that is the answer here. Moving on, what command is used to set up the AWS CLI installation? I showed this a little bit since mine was already configured, but using AWS configure will give you those sort of those default values that you need to throw in, and it doesn't really matter what you put there since the endpoint we're going for isn't it's not going to be local. So we're searching for a different endpoint, which is s3.thetoppers.htb instead of one that's local to us. So using this AWS configure is sort of a good prerequisite, and I'm pretty sure the tool won't work if you don't do this. So make sure you use AWS configure. The next one here is what is the command used by the above utility to list all of the S3 buckets? And we did AWS S3 ls, and that's when we saw the toppers.htb was a bucket being hosted within S3. So this is how we need to dig deeper there. Task 9, the server is configured to run files written in what web scripting language? We saw this with both Wappalizer and when we listed out the contents of the S3 bucket. We saw that there was an index.php file, and Wappalizer also picked up that it was PHP. So both ways that we were able to figure out as PHP. And then finally, we were able to upload our reverse shell, get a shell on the box, and then we were able to find the root flag in var www, the var www directory, and grab it here. So that is about it for the box. I appreciate you guys for coming out again this week. This is the last box of tier 2, or tier 1, I think. Yeah, so tier 1 is the last box of tier 1. This was a long tier, so thanks for sticking with it. Next week is going to be super exciting. We're starting the last segment of this series, which is the tier 2 boxes, and we're going to be doing archetype, which apparently we're going to be completing together because I haven't done it yet. So it's going to be super fun to dive into archetype. I hope you enjoyed something about this video and hope you learned something, but I'll see you next week when we take on archetype. Have a great day and happy hacking.